In today's life story, we meet Rachel, a young woman whose journey is filled with hardship, love, and unexpected turns. For years, she endured the cruelty of her parents. But everything changed one fateful night when she crossed paths with a homeless man named Tyler. This encounter would set Rachel on a path that would challenge everything she believed and force her to make life-altering decisions. Join us as we explore Rachel's journey of hope, sacrifice, and the power of compassion. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to begin today's story with life stories. I never thought I'd find the courage to run away. But here I was, sneaking through the dark hallway of my parents' house. My name is Rachel, and for 20 years, my parents had made my life a living hell. The house, a small, worn-out building in the suburbs of Chicago, had never been a place of comfort for me. The air was thick with tension, the walls marked by anger and cruelty. Every day was a battle. But tonight I was finally breaking free. I pulled my threadbare coat tighter around me, my eyes darting back and forth to make sure they were still asleep. Every step I took was calculated, careful not to put too much weight on the creaky floorboards. I knew all too well what would happen if I woke them. The scars on my arms, hidden beneath the long sleeves of my worn shirt, were a constant reminder of their fury. They were my parents, but they had never truly been parents to me. They were tormentors, using their power to control, to hurt, to break me. As I reached the kitchen, my stomach growled painfully. I had barely eaten all day, a common experience. My parents kept the good food locked away, where I couldn't reach it. They said I didn't deserve anything better. I had long ago learned to hide small portions for myself. Tonight, I grabbed the bowl of oatmeal I had carefully stashed in the back of the fridge for this very moment. It wasn't much, but it had to last. It had to get me far away from here. With the bowl tucked safely into my bag, I crept toward the front door. I had planned everything carefully, meticulously, but nothing could ever prepare me for the moment I reached the door. As I carefully turned the key, I heard a faint creak from my parents' bedroom. My heart nearly stopped. My father had called my name. Sometimes he talked in his sleep, and I prayed this was one of those times. I stood frozen, barely breathing, praying that the night would stay silent, that my escape wouldn't be caught. It felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes before I finally opened the door and slipped outside. The cool air hit my face, and for a moment, I felt a surge of hope, of freedom. For the first time in my life, I was free to go anywhere, to live the life I had dreamed of. At 20 years old, I had never been allowed to study or to learn anything beyond the confines of this house. All I wanted was to work, to earn enough money to never go hungry again, to never feel trapped. But just as I stepped onto the street, my plans came to a sudden halt. Leaning against the cold brick wall of an alley was a man who looked even worse off than me. He was thin, his tangled hair framing a face that, despite the dirt, still held traces of remarkable beauty. The man looked up, surprised, flickering in his eyes as he realized I was actually acknowledging his existence. My heart ached for him. How many people must walk by every day pretending not to see him? How many others had passed him by, uncaring, unfeeling? I hesitated. My carefully laid plans crumbled in the face of this man's obvious suffering. As bad as things were for me at home, at least I got one meal a day. This man probably hadn't eaten in who knows how long. Before I knew what I was doing, I found myself walking toward him, the bowl of oatmeal still in my hands. "I don't know your name," I said softly, my voice trembling as I held out the bowl. "But you look like you need this more than I do." He looked at me with confusion at first, then recognition. "Tyler," he said, his hands shaking as he took the bowl. "My name is Tyler. And you must be Rachel." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "How do you know my name?" I asked, unable to keep the suspicion out of my voice. Tyler looked at me for a moment before answering. I heard someone saying your name earlier when I was passing by, he explained, looking down at the bowl in his hands. Why are you doing this for me? His voice was hoarse, filled with the distrust of someone who had little reason to expect kindness from the world. I glanced around, making sure the night still cloaked us in darkness and silence, and then spoke. Because I know what it's like to be hungry, I confessed in a low voice. The admission felt freeing, yet burdened with the knowledge that I couldn't just leave him there. I couldn't leave him alone to suffer. Tyler studied me with new eyes, a faint curve touching the corner of his mouth. In that moment, standing there with this stranger, I felt a connection I had never experienced before. For the first time in my life, I had chosen to help someone else, even at the cost of my own plans. Somehow, that choice made me feel stronger than I ever had before. As we sat in the shed, sharing the meager meal together, something changed in me. I had spent my whole life being trapped, controlled, and abused by my parents. But here, with Tyler, I was finally doing something that mattered. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. And I would keep coming back for as long as Tyler needed me. I don't know how I had managed to survive for so long. I had always dreamed of escaping, of finding a life outside the abuse. But I had never had the courage until now. It was Tyler, this stranger who had nothing, who had given me that courage. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to build a new life. For both of us. The next morning, as I woke up from a restless sleep, the reality of my situation sank in again. My parents were still in the house, and I had no idea how long they would stay asleep. My body ached from the tension, the fear of getting caught. But there was something else now, something that kept me going. Tyler. I had made a promise to him. And now I had a purpose. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a reason to fight back against everything that had held me down for so long. I had snuck back into the house through the back door, my heart racing as I tried to act normal. My mother was in the kitchen, already up and bustling around. The room smelled of burnt toast, and the air was thick with the same coldness that had hung over this house for as long as I could remember. "Good morning, Mom," I said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I had made extra breakfast for both of them today. If I was careful, they wouldn't notice the difference. "I made a little extra for you both today." My mother eyed me suspiciously, her sharp gaze making me feel like a criminal in my own home. "Food is expensive," she snapped, a familiar sneer crossing her face. "You eat too much." Before I could respond, her hand flew out, striking me across the face. "This is to teach you not to waste," she hissed. "You won't eat anything more today." The sting from her slap still lingered on my cheek, but I had learned long ago that any reaction would only make it worse. I fought back tears as she snatched the bowl away from me. My stomach growled, but I had to be careful. I couldn't let them catch on to what I was doing. Once I had the chance, I grabbed the hidden container of oatmeal I had prepared for Tyler and slipped out the back door. Each step felt like a heavy weight on my shoulders. I couldn't help but feel the familiar sting of guilt. What if they found out what I was doing? What would happen to me then? But Tyler needed me. As I walked to the shed, the chilly morning air biting at my skin, I saw him still asleep, curled up in the corner. His body looked fragile, as if every bone in him ached. I whispered his name gently, and he stirred, blinking up at me in confusion. "I brought you some food," I said, my voice soft. His eyes lit up as he sat up slowly, groggily reaching for the bowl. "You really came back," he said in disbelief, his voice hoarse. "You didn't have to." I shook my head. "I want to help. You don't have to go through this alone." Tyler took the bowl from me, but I noticed how his hands shook, the same way mine had done when I had been starving at home. "Thank you, Rachel. You're the only person who's ever shown me kindness." My chest tightened at his words. I had never been a person to receive kindness. I had only known cruelty. But here I was, helping someone else. And it felt right. For the first time. I wasn't just surviving, I was living. We ate in silence. The warmth from the food spreading through my cold limbs. But there was something more, the warmth that came from knowing I was doing something worthwhile. Something that made a difference. I didn't have much to give. But I was giving what I could. For Tyler. And for myself. After we finished, I helped him into the makeshift bed I had set up for him in the corner. You should rest, I told him, brushing a lock of hair from his face. It's too cold out there. Stay here as long as you need. Tyler looked up at me, gratitude in his eyes. But there was something else too, something that made my heart race. Rachel, he said, his voice a little more serious. You've done so much for me already. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. I looked at him, searching for the right words. I know what it's like to be hungry, to be alone. I couldn't leave you here. Not when I know I can help. His eyes softened, and a faint smile touched the corner of his lips. You're different, Rachel. You have a good heart. One that this world couldn't break. His words hit me harder than I expected. He had been through so much. And yet he saw something in me, something good. It made me feel both proud and sad. Proud that I could be the one to help. But sad because I knew how hard life had been for both of us. It had made us strong. But it had also left us scarred. I just want to be someone who can make a difference, I whispered, looking at the small shed, feeling a sense of purpose for the first time. Maybe I can't save the world, but I can make a difference here. For you. For me. Tyler nodded, his gaze warm. Thank you, Rachel. You've already made a difference in my life. I smiled, feeling a warmth in my heart that had been absent for so long. As I stood up to leave, I promised him that I would be back. I had no idea how I was going to manage everything. But for the first time, I knew I couldn't leave Tyler alone. We both needed each other. And somehow, I would find a way to make it work. The next few days would test me, test my resolve, my strength, and my determination, but I was ready. For Tyler. For myself. For the first time in my life, I was willing to take risks. To go against everything I had been taught. I was going to fight for something real. And no matter what happened, I wouldn't let fear stop me. Not anymore. The days that followed were a blur of quiet tension and secretive acts of kindness. I spent every moment I could sneaking away from my parents to check on Tyler. To bring him food, blankets, and whatever I could spare. Each time, I found him weaker, struggling with the cold, his body barely able to hold on. I could feel his gratitude every time he smiled. But I could also sense the fear in his eyes. The same fear I felt when I thought about what my parents would do if they ever found out what I was doing. The lies I told my parents, the excuses I made about why I was always sneaking out, started to wear thin. Every day they watched me more closely, their suspicions growing with every passing moment. I could feel it in the way they looked at me, the way my mother's eyes narrowed whenever I went near the door or when I returned from one of my trips. I knew that soon. The facade would crumble. But Tyler needed me. I couldn't leave him. So, I kept up the charade. My heart racing every time I stepped out of the house. One evening, I found myself standing in front of the shed. The harsh wind whipping around me. The weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. Tyler was inside, shivering beneath the thin blanket I had brought him earlier. I crouched down beside him, offering him the small bowl of soup I had made. But my mind was elsewhere. I was running out of time. I could feel it in my bones. My parents were getting more suspicious by the day. And I knew it was only a matter of time before they discovered everything. But I didn't care anymore. I couldn't go back. Rachel, Tyler said, his voice weak but steady. You're doing so much for me. And I can't understand why. Why do you keep coming back? You don't owe me anything. I looked at him, the warmth in my heart growing as I realized that, despite everything, This was the first time in my life that I felt like I was truly making a difference. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And for the first time, I wasn't alone. I don't know, I replied softly, my voice trembling. Maybe because I see something in you. Something good. Something worth fighting for. Tyler's eyes softened. And for the first time, I saw a glimmer of hope in his gaze. He reached out, taking my hand in his. Rachel, you're the first person to show me kindness. The first person who hasn't walked away. I don't know how to repay you for that. I shook my head, my throat tightening as emotions I didn't even know I had flooded through me. You don't have to repay me. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. Tyler's grip on my hand tightened, and I could feel the sincerity in his words. Thank you, Rachel. You've already saved my life in more ways than one. I could feel the tears building in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I had made my decision. Tyler needed me, and I wasn't going to walk away. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, I woke early, the weight of the decision I had made still pressing down on me. My parents were still asleep, but I knew that time was running out. I had to find a way to get Tyler the help he needed before it was too late. I slipped out of the house quietly, my heart pounding in my chest. As I made my way to the shed, I realized just how much I had changed in the past few days. I was no longer afraid of what my parents would do to me. I was no longer afraid of the punishment they would dish out if they found out what I was doing. All I cared about now was helping Tyler, making sure he survived. When I reached the shed, I found Tyler still lying there, his body frail and weak. I rushed to his side, my hands trembling as I placed the bowl of food in front of him. Tyler, I need you to eat, I said urgently. You can't keep going like this. Tyler looked at me, his eyes filled with gratitude but also something else, something that made my heart ache. I'm sorry, Rachel. I never meant to drag you into this. You've already done so much for me. I shook my head, brushing a strand of hair away from his forehead. You haven't dragged me into anything, Tyler. I'm here because I want to be, and I'm not going anywhere. Tyler smiled weakly, but there was a sadness in his eyes that made my chest tighten. I don't know what I'll do without you, Rachel. You've given me more than anyone ever has. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. You'll be okay. I'll make sure of it. But deep down, I knew that I couldn't guarantee anything. I knew that the situation was getting more dangerous every day, and I couldn't protect Tyler forever. But I would do everything in my power to try. As the days passed, I continued to care for Tyler, sneaking away from my parents whenever I could, trying to keep up the facade of being a dutiful daughter while secretly working to save a life. The tension at home grew. My parents' suspicion was palpable. But I didn't care. I couldn't. I had made a promise to Tyler, and I was going to keep it. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew one thing, I wasn't going to let fear stop me now. Not when I had come this far. Not when Tyler needed me. And I was ready to face whatever came next. The days continued to blend into one another, each passing moment a quiet reminder of the consequences of my actions. I was living on borrowed time, and the reality of the situation weighed heavily on me. Every step I took to help Tyler was a risk. Every moment spent outside the house was a gamble. But I couldn't stop. I had already come too far. Tyler was depending on me, and no matter how much fear crept into my mind, I couldn't back down. That evening, I crept out of my room as quietly as I could, heart racing with each step, each creak of the floorboards. My parents were in their usual spots. My mother in the kitchen. My father in front of the television. They hadn't suspected anything yet. But I could feel the tension building. The walls were closing in on me, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they found out what I had been doing. I reached the shed again, my heart pounding in my chest. But when I opened the door, Tyler wasn't where I left him. Panic surged through me as I stepped further inside. calling his name softly, my voice trembling. Tyler. A faint groan came from the back of the shed, and I rushed over, finding him lying on the cold floor, his face pale and drenched in sweat. Tyler. I whispered urgently, kneeling beside him. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked at me with a mix of surprise and relief. I'm so sorry. Rachel, he said weakly. I didn't mean to worry you. I don't know if I can keep going. I felt a wave of desperation rise in me. You have to keep fighting. Tyler. Please. You're so close. I'm here with you. I won't leave you. Tyler's lips trembled, and he reached out, his hand grasping mine. I don't want you to get in trouble because of me, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Tyler. I made my choice. I replied firmly, my eyes meeting his with determination. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together. He looked at me with such gratitude that it took my breath away. In that moment, I knew without a doubt that I would do whatever it took to protect him. But as I sat there with him, the weight of my decision pressed on me. The thought of what my parents would do if they found out, of the consequences we both faced, was unbearable. I had to act quickly. As much as I wanted to stay with Tyler, I knew I couldn't afford to linger. Every second that passed put us both in greater danger. The cold had seeped into his bones, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. I had to get him somewhere safe, somewhere where he could heal and where he could be taken care of. Tyler. Listen to me, I said, my voice calm but insistent. We need to get you out of here. I'm going to get you help. You're going to be okay. I promise. He shook his head weakly. But I don't want to be a burden to you. Rachel. I've already taken so much from you. Don't talk like that. I snapped, my voice breaking. You're not a burden. You're a person. And I'm not leaving you. The urgency in my voice seemed to give him a burst of strength. He nodded, though his face still showed the toll the cold had taken on him. Thank you, Rachel. I don't know what I'd do without you. Don't think about that, I said, squeezing his hand. Think about getting better. We're going to make it through this. I swear. I stood up, looking around the shed, trying to formulate a plan. Tyler was too weak to walk, and I couldn't carry him on my own. But I had to find a way. I knew if I didn't act quickly, things would only get worse. As I looked around the shed, my mind raced. I needed a distraction. I needed to buy us time before my parents realized what was going on. My eyes landed on a thick blanket I had brought earlier, and I made a decision. I would sneak Tyler out in the blanket, wrap him up tight, and carry him as far as I could. I just had to get him away from the house. I moved quickly, grabbing the blanket and wrapping it around Tyler, helping him to sit up. I'm going to carry you, Tyler. It's going to be hard, but we can do this. He nodded weakly, his body trembling in my arms. I trust you, Rachel. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I had no idea what I was about to face, but I couldn't stop now. The decision had been made, and I wasn't going to let fear stop me. As I carefully carried Tyler through the cold night, every step felt like it was taking us farther from the world I had known and closer to the unknown. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what the future held. I wasn't afraid of the consequences. I was doing this for him, and I was doing it for me. When we reached the far end of the street, I stopped for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I couldn't go back, but I also knew I couldn't carry Tyler any further on my own. I had to find help, and quickly. But as I stood there, trying to catch my breath, I heard something behind me, footsteps. My heart skipped a beat. It was my parents. I froze, panic surging through me. I couldn't afford to panic. I had to think fast. The footsteps grew louder, and the sound of my parents' voices echoed through the cold night air. I knew they had realized I was gone. They had found my absence. And they were searching for me. Rachel, my mother's voice cut through the stillness. Sharp and accusing. Where are you? My heart pounded in my chest. My breath coming in quick. Shallow bursts. The weight of the situation was overwhelming. I had to protect Tyler. I had to keep him safe. But I also couldn't leave him behind. I looked down at Tyler. His face pale and weak. He was barely able to sit up, let alone run. There was no way we would make it far enough to evade my parents. Panic and dread surged in me, but I pushed it aside. There had to be a way out. There had to be someone who could help. I looked around frantically, trying to find an escape. That's when I saw it, the light from a nearby house. Faint but visible through the trees. It was my neighbor's house. I had never spoken to her much. But in this moment, she might be the only chance we had. With no time to think, I hoisted Tyler's weakened body onto my back, wrapping him as best as I could in the blanket. I moved quickly, every muscle screaming in protest. But I knew I had no choice. Every second mattered. As I moved toward the neighbor's house, I could hear my parents' voices growing closer. But I kept my focus straight ahead. Tyler's breathing was shallow and labored, his weight dragging me down. But I couldn't stop. I could feel the fear in his trembling body. But I kept reassuring him. My voice steady even as my mind raced. We're almost there. Tyler. I whispered, forcing myself to keep calm. Just hold on. But Tyler's breath was growing weaker. And I feared the worst. What if he didn't make it through this? What if he died because I couldn't get him the help he needed in time? I pushed these thoughts out of my mind and kept walking, my feet carrying me toward the house that might hold our salvation. Finally, we reached the neighbor's porch. I knocked frantically, almost banging on the door, desperate for help. There was no time to be polite or to explain the situation. I just needed someone to answer. The door creaked open, and I was met by the startled face of Mrs. Miller, the elderly woman who lived next door. She had always been kind to me, though we had never been close. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw me, breathless and covered in sweat, carrying a near-unconscious Tyler on my back. "Rachel," she gasped, her voice trembling. "What on earth? What's happening?" "I need help," I said quickly, almost pleading. "Tyler's sick. And he needs care. I need to get him inside. Please. I don't know what to do." Without hesitation, Mrs. Miller stepped aside, allowing me to carry Tyler in. She led me to her small living room and helped me lay him down on her couch. She immediately ran to her phone, calling for an ambulance. "Don't worry, Rachel," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "Help is on the way. You did the right thing." As I stood there, exhausted and scared, I could feel a wave of gratitude and relief washing over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't alone. Someone was here to help. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel hope. Minutes later, the ambulance arrived, and the paramedics quickly took over, hooking Tyler up to an oxygen mask and starting an 4. I stood back, watching with bated breath as they worked on him, praying that they could save him. Mrs. Miller stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder. "You're doing a good thing, Rachel," she said softly. "This boy, he's lucky to have you." I nodded, unable to find the words. I couldn't explain to her the depth of what this moment meant. It wasn't just about helping Tyler, it was about proving to myself that I could make a difference. That I could be brave. Even in the face of everything that had happened to me, I could see the light of hope in Tyler's eyes, even as he was being taken away in the ambulance. It was a small spark, but it was enough. He was going to be okay. And so was I. As the ambulance drove off into the night, I stood there on Mrs. Miller's porch, watching it disappear into the distance. I felt a weight lift from my chest. It wasn't over yet. There would still be obstacles to face, still more challenges ahead. But for the first time, I knew I had done the right thing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a future to look forward to. When I turned back to Mrs. Miller, I saw a knowing smile on her face. She didn't need to say anything. She understood. "I'll take you home, Rachel," she said gently. "You need to rest." And as I climbed into her car and drove back to my house, the fear that had plagued me for so long seemed to fade. If only for a moment. There was still much to face. But I knew that with a little help from the people who cared about me, I could keep going. One step at a time. Tyler was safe. I was safe. And I wasn't alone anymore. That, in itself, was a victory. The following days were a whirlwind. My body was exhausted. My mind still racing from everything that had happened. But even though I felt drained, something in me had shifted. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. I had a purpose. And I had made a difference in someone's life. Tyler was out of the woods. And I was still standing. But the peace I had momentarily found was fragile. It didn't last long before my parents' anger came crashing down on me once more. They were furious that I had gone behind their backs to help Tyler. They didn't care about the fact that I had saved his life. All they saw was their authority being challenged. And their control slipping away. They didn't know how to react. Except with rage. The arguments started as soon as I stepped through the front door. Their voices loud and sharp. Cutting through the silence of the house. They didn't understand why I had done it. They didn't understand that it wasn't just about the food or the risks I had taken, it was about the kindness I had shown someone who had nothing. "Do you realize what you've done, Rachel?" my mother screamed. "You risked everything for that beggar." Her words stung. Even though I had expected them. I didn't respond right away. What could I say? That I wasn't sorry for helping someone who needed me? That I wasn't sorry for doing what I believed was right? But I couldn't let them see how their words affected me. I couldn't let them see that their cruelty was still having an impact on me. No matter how hard I tried to hide it. I couldn't leave him. I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm that raged inside me. I couldn't just ignore someone who needed help. "You're not thinking straight," my father barked. His face red with anger. "You've been so blinded by your own foolishness that you don't even care what you're doing to this family." I held my ground. I had done what I had to do. I wasn't going to apologize for it. "You're wrong," I said. More firmly this time. "I'm doing this because it's right. I'm not going to be the person you want me to be anymore." Their faces twisted with confusion and frustration. They didn't know how to deal with the person I was becoming. And honestly, neither did I. But what I did know was that I couldn't keep living the way they wanted me to. I couldn't keep bowing to their expectations and hiding who I was. I had seen a different path. And now I knew that I had the strength to walk it. The days after that argument were strained. To say the least. My parents became colder. Their eyes filled with judgment and disdain every time they looked at me. But despite their anger, I knew that I had made the right decision. I was beginning to see that I was worth more than the life they had trapped me in. But there was still one more obstacle standing in my way. I hadn't seen Tyler since the night I helped him. But I knew that I had to go back to him. I had to make sure that he was okay. That he was healing. He had given me something I had never experienced before, a connection. He had made me feel seen, valued, loved in a way that my parents never had. It was time for me to face the truth. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when it wasn't. I had to leave. I had to break free of the chains my parents had wrapped around me. One evening, I found myself standing outside the same old shed. My heart was racing. My thoughts scattered as I looked at the small building. It felt like a lifetime ago that I had brought Tyler here. Hiding him from my parents. Taking care of him when no one else would. I knocked softly on the door. And Tyler's voice answered almost immediately. "Rachel?" His voice was weak. Still recovering. But it was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. "I'm here," I replied softly. Stepping inside. He looked up at me with a tired smile. His face still pale from his illness. But there was something in his eyes that made me feel like everything was going to be okay. The weight of the world didn't seem so heavy when I was with him. "I'm sorry for everything," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "but I have to leave. I can't stay here anymore. I can't live like this." Tyler's expression softened, and he reached out for my hand. "You don't have to apologize, Rachel," he said gently. "You did what you had to do. And I'll be right here, waiting for you." The words were a promise, and I felt a surge of warmth fill me. It wasn't just a promise to wait for me, it was a promise of something better. Something more. Something that was within reach. "I'm going to make it out of here," I said, determination in my voice. "And I'm going to make sure you're not alone." Tyler nodded, his eyes full of quiet understanding. "I'll wait for you," he said. "And when you're ready, we'll face whatever comes together." The future was uncertain, but for the first time, I felt like I had a real chance at something better, something of my own. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. As Rachel and Tyler stood side by side, the weight of their past slowly began to lift. With every step, they moved further from the cruelty Rachel had endured and closer to a future filled with love, respect, and the promise of a fresh start. Together, they built a life grounded in kindness and understanding. A life where they supported each other's dreams. Rachel's journey, once defined by fear and survival, was now about growth and new beginnings. And while the road ahead remained uncertain, she knew that as long as they were together, they could face anything. The pain of the past had shaped her, but it no longer controlled her. It was, after all, the love and strength she shared with Tyler that would carry them forward. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring life stories.